Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. We'll start in Moscow, where the tone hasn't softened, but it has sharpened. Over the weekend and into Monday, Dmitry Medvedev went back out front, and this time he wasn't just blustering on social media. In a coordinated set of interviews, he laid out again that Russia's demands to end the war are unchanged. Ukraine gives up Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson in full, accepts neutrality, and agrees to a dramatically reduced military. That part we've heard before. The update is how blunt he was about political outcomes. Medvedev said dismantling the current Ukrainian government is an extremely important task and questioned Zelensky's legitimacy outright. This wasn't coded language. It was very direct, very intentional, and clearly aimed at setting red lines ahead of the next round of talks. He also doubled down on rejecting any Western security presence in Ukraine. British, French, German, it doesn't matter. Medvedev said foreign troops would be considered legitimate targets, and Sergei Lavrov reinforced that message again on Monday. This isn't new policy, but it is a reminder that Moscow is trying to kill the stabilization force idea before it gets any momentum. If yesterday was about Russia saying no, today is about Russia underlining it in red marker. Layered into this was more nuclear signaling. With the New START treaty expiring this week, Medvedev repeated that Russia is open to an extension, but only if the U.S. plays along. At the same time, he warned about rising global conflict and emphasized Russia's updated nuclear doctrine. Russian state TV took that cue and ran with it, including one particularly unhinged segment suggesting that nuking satellites in space, specifically Starlink, would solve Russia's problems. It was delivered half-jokingly, but the implication was clear. This is Moscow reminding everyone that escalation ladders don't stop at the atmosphere anymore. All of this sits in the shadow of the next round of U.S.-Russia-Ukraine talks, now set for Abu Dhabi. President Trump has been publicly optimistic, saying on Monday that his administration may soon have good news. Zelensky, meanwhile, has struck a cautiously hopeful tone, saying a dignified and lasting peace is realistic. What's changed since yesterday is a bit more clarity on how Ukraine and its partners are thinking about enforcement. Kyiv has aligned with European governments and the U.S. on a multi-tiered response framework for any future ceasefire violations, starting with diplomatic warnings, then Ukrainian military action, then escalation involving European forces, and eventually U.S. involvement if things spiral. Russia has rejected this concept outright, but it's now clearly part of Western planning rather than a theoretical discussion. Now let's talk about the so-called energy ceasefire, because this is another area where today's picture is a little clearer than yesterday's. Zelensky said Russia largely refrained from targeted strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure over a recent 24-hour period, crediting U.S. pressure. Moscow says that pause expired Sunday. Ukraine says it was supposed to last a week. The practical reality is that while Russia eased off major grid attacks briefly, it did not stop striking. Overnight attacks hit Kyiv, Kharkiv, and several other regions with drones and missiles, damaging apartment buildings, rail infrastructure, and civilian facilities. One strike damaged a building housing a kindergarten. Another hit a diesel train. Temperatures were hovering near -20 Celsius. This is consistent with what we talked about yesterday, Russia shifting pressure rather than reducing it. The lights may stay on a bit longer, but the pressure campaign hasn't gone anywhere. One area where we do have a meaningful update is Starlink. Yesterday, we talked about SpaceX taking steps to limit Russian use of Starlink on drones. Today, that's moved from initial measures to a broader system. Ukraine's defense minister confirmed that only registered, verified Starlink terminals will now work inside Ukraine. Everything else gets shut off. SpaceX has reportedly imposed speed limits that make Starlink unusable on fast-moving drones, and a whitelist system is rolling out. Ukrainian officials say they're already seeing real results. Russian war bloggers are not happy, complaining about lost connectivity and degraded drone control. Watching a commercial space company kneecap an adversary's drone program in real time is still one of the most surreal features of this war, and it's clearly rattled Moscow. On the battlefield, there's no dramatic reversal today, but the pattern is holding. Russian forces continue pushing around Lyman, Kupiansk, Pokrovsk, and near Kharkiv, but without decisive breakthroughs. Lyman remains the key objective, as it's the gateway to a future push towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk later this spring or summer. The update here is that analysts are increasingly skeptical Russia can meet its own timelines without major reinforcements. Units involved have been fighting for years and are badly worn down. Ukrainian counterattacks around Kupiansk have forced Russia to commit reserves defensively, which limits what it can do elsewhere. The fighting continues, but it's grinding, not dynamic. Inside Russia, the internal security story is also moving forward. The State Duma has advanced legislation that would give the FSB sweeping authority to shut down communications, mobile networks, internet, potentially even satellite, whenever it claims there's a security threat. Telecom companies would be shielded from lawsuits over outages. Officials say this is about countering Ukrainian drones, but the language is intentionally broad. This is formalizing powers the state has already used sporadically, and it's another step toward making nationwide blackouts legally routine if the Kremlin feels pressured. Mobilization pressure is also intensifying. Regional governments are raising sign-up bonuses again, in some cases north of $30,000 equivalent. Universities are being leaned on to steer students toward unmanned systems roles. Independent counts of Russian war dead have now passed 168,000 verified names, with thousands added in recent weeks, and courts continue quietly removing cases related to missing or deceased soldiers from public databases. At the same time, Russia is still leaning on foreign recruits. A Kenyan man recruited while working in Qatar was killed in Donetsk during a high-casualty assault, and his family is now trying to recover his body. It's a stark reminder that Moscow is pulling from wherever it can to keep the war going. Zooming out, the broader European picture is also sharpening. Germany arrested 5 people accused of exporting tens of millions of euros worth of goods to Russian defense firms through shell companies, showing that sanctions enforcement is still very much an active battlefield. Belarus has launched multiple balloon-like objects into Polish airspace over the past several days. Low-tech, deniable probes that fit neatly into Russia's gray zone playbook. Poland, for its part, is leaning harder into cooperation with Nordic and Baltic partners, especially since Finland and Sweden joined NATO. The Baltic Sea is now central to energy, trade, and military logistics, and Warsaw is treating it accordingly. And finally, Russia's intelligence services are back to familiar habits. This week, they accused France of plotting coups across Africa and backing efforts to overthrow unfriendly governments. It's a well-worn narrative. Paint the West as destabilizing, deflect attention from Russia's own activities, and keep the information space noisy. It's not subtle, but it's consistent. Thanks for listening and being part of the RH community. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review. If you want to see some changes, email us at info@restrictedhandling.com. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK.